Today I will be presenting on disturbances, disasters, and resiliency, the role of ecotourism in post-crisis recovery in the Caribbean. For this study, ecotourism can be defined by three pillars. First, ecological conservation. Second, environmental education to tourists. And third, community benefits. I chose to conduct research in Cuba and Puerto Rico, which are two locations that can represent small island developing states, or SIDS. They have a shared history of colonialism, which has resulted in economic crises. Because this study was executed in 2018, it was only 1 year after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico and Hurricane Irma hit Cuba. Therefore, both SIDS had just experienced natural crises as well. The research question I created is, what is the current status and potential future of ecotourism on post-crisis Cuba and Puerto Rico based on perceptions of stakeholders engaged in the industry? For my methodologies, I first did an extensive literature review to better understand the historical backgrounds of economic demise, natural disasters, and tourism statistics. Next, I identified research sites that offered ecotourism experiences on the two islands. I traveled to Cuba and then to Puerto Rico and conducted 25 semi-structured interviews in total. Interviewees were identified as stakeholders working within the ecotourism industry. I used snowball method and purposive sampling to find my informants. Afterwards, I did deductive and inductive coding in vivo software. I will now go over the results of the three pillars as perceived by stakeholders. In Cuba, conservation was perceived as not littering, educating tourists on flora and fauna, and educating farmers on soil conservation. In Puerto Rico, conservation was not really mentioned in interviews, and there was an emphasis on recovery over conservation due to Hurricane Maria. For education, it ended up not just being environmental education for tourists, but also cultural education and political education and all these other themes listed below. And in Puerto Rico, stakeholders spoke not just of education of tourists, but also education of staff and community members. And community benefits were perceived in Cuba as financial, educational, and cultural, and in Puerto Rico as direct employment, free tours, and programs. And community benefits were mentioned the most in Puerto Rican interviews, with an emphasis on programs for entrepreneurs to start their own ecotourism operations. I also looked at perceptions of growth of ecotourism, and 77% of informants thought there was current growth in Cuba, and 86% of them thought there was future growth. And in Puerto Rico, 100% of the informants thought there was current growth, and 100% thought there was future growth of ecotourism. And I have 5 main conclusions. The first is there are differences in understanding what conservation means, potentially limiting conservation efforts in the ecotourism industry. Education in ecotourism is not just of what, but for whom, making it a more complex component. Community benefits from ecotourism can take other forms besides monetary benefits, and listening to what locals want and need should be prioritized. The 3 pillars of ecotourism overlapped frequently in different ways on the 2 islands, suggesting that ecotourism is not as easily defined and can be site-specific. And finally, despite ecological and economic crises, both islands see current and future growth in ecotourism, providing hope that ecotourism can be used as a tool for resiliency on SIDS in post-crisis. This research can be relevant today as we are nearing the end of a global crisis, and SIDS will need to recover their tourism industry, and ecotourism is one promising solution. This research wasn't possible without the support from the following institution, advising hosts, and funders. Thank you.